The desert was silent, except for the whispering wind moving through the sand. John Carter drove his old pickup truck along the empty highway, his headlights cutting through the darkness. It was supposed to be a normal night, just another long drive home after a late shift at the mechanic shop. But fate had other plans. A bright blue light suddenly streaked across the sky. It wasn't like a normal shooting star. It was bigger, faster, and heading straight down. Boom! A distant explosion shook the ground. The light disappeared behind a hill, leaving behind a thin trail of smoke. John slammed the brakes. His heart pounded. What the hell was that? A plane crash? A meteor? Or something else? Curiosity burned in his mind. He shouldn't go. He should just call the cops and drive away. But something inside him told him to check it out. A bad decision. Maybe. But he had to know. John grabbed his flashlight and climbed out of his truck. The night air was cold, and the silence felt too deep. He walked toward the smoke, his boots crunching against the dry sand. As he reached the top of the hill, his breath caught in his throat. Below him, in a small crater, was something not from this world. It was a ship, small, sleek, and silver, with strange blue symbols glowing along its body. Steam hissed from the cracks in its surface, and the ground around it was burned black. John's instincts screamed at him to run. This was crazy. He shouldn't be here. But before he could turn back, he heard it. A weak, struggling voice. He stepped closer. And then he saw him. Near the ship, an old alien lay on the ground, barely breathing. His skin was dark blue, and his eyes glowed with a soft golden light. He wore a tattered silver robe, and his long, clawed fingers clutched his chest in pain. John froze. This wasn't possible. The alien's glowing eyes met his. Please. The voice was deep but weak. Help. Me. John's mind raced. This was first contact. He was staring at an actual alien, and it was asking him for help. He should leave. He should run back to his truck and pretend this never happened. But then he saw the blood, a thick, dark liquid pooling around the alien's body. This wasn't a monster. This wasn't a threat. This was someone who needed help. John took a deep breath. All right, old man. Let's get you out of here. John knelt down and carefully lifted the alien. He was lighter than he looked, but his body was cold and trembling. As soon as John touched him, a strange warmth spread through his arms, like an electric current flowing into his skin. He ignored it and carried the alien back up the hill toward his truck. But just as he reached the road, he heard a deep mechanical hum behind him. John turned, and his blood ran cold. 3 dark figures stood near the crashed ship. They were tall, their armor gleaming under the moonlight. Their red, glowing eyes locked onto him. They weren't here to help. John's heart pounded. Who were they? Another alien race. Soldiers? Hunters. One of them raised a weapon, a sleek black rifle with a pulsing blue core. John ran. A blast of energy scorched the ground behind him, kicking up sand and heat. He sprinted faster, throwing the truck door open and shoving the alien inside. Another blast, closer this time. John jumped into the driver's seat and slammed the gas. The tires screeched, and the truck shot forward, dust and smoke trailing behind. In the mirror, the figures stood still, watching him escape. For now, John drove fast, his heart pounding in his chest. What had he just gotten himself into? He had just saved an alien, a dying alien. And now, there were others hunting them. Beside him, the alien groaned in pain. John glanced at him, unsure what to do. How do you save an alien? Hospitals were out of the question. Cops, even worse. Then, with his last bit of strength, the alien reached out and grabbed John's arm. A burning sensation shot through John's skin. He cried out, gripping the wheel as a strange golden symbol burned into his forearm. It glowed brightly for a second, then faded, leaving a permanent mark. John gasped, his arm tingling. "What? What did you do to me?" he whispered. The alien, barely able to speak, gave a weak smile. "You have changed everything." Then his eyes closed. John didn't know it yet, but this single act, this one moment, had sealed his fate forever. John's hands trembled as he tightened his grip on the steering wheel. His heart was still racing from the chase, the alien's weak breaths, the only sound in the cab of the truck. The golden symbol on his arm still burned, though the pain had dulled to a strange warmth. He didn't know what it meant, but he knew one thing for certain. His life had just changed forever. The alien elder lay unconscious beside him, his dark blue skin barely rising and falling with each breath. John knew he couldn't take him to a hospital. Even if the doctors were willing to treat an extraterrestrial, those armored hunters would surely be tracking them. John needed a plan. The road stretched endlessly through the desert, no other vehicles in sight. He considered heading home, but that was too risky. What if they had some kind of tracking technology? What if they were already watching? Then he thought of someone who might help. His old friend, Mark. Mark was an ex-military engineer who had spent years working on classified projects. He was paranoid, always talking about government secrets and things they didn't want people to know. If anyone could make sense of what was happening, it was him. John grabbed his phone, swiping through his contacts. The phone rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "Who the hell calls at this hour?" "Mark, it's John. I need your help." A pause. Then suspicion crept into Mark's voice. "What kind of help?" John glanced at the unconscious alien, then back at the road. "The kind that involves something not from around here." Silence. Then Mark sighed. "You better get over here. And don't bring trouble with you." John didn't make any promises. 30 minutes later, John pulled up to Mark's workshop, an old airplane hangar in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by junked cars and rusted equipment. Mark had always been a loner, preferring machines over people. It was probably the safest place John could think of. As he stepped out of the truck, Mark was already waiting at the door, arms crossed. He was tall, bald, and had the build of someone who had seen more fights than he could count. His sharp eyes narrowed when he saw the alien slumped in the passenger seat. "Jesus, John, what the hell did you get yourself into?" John sighed. "I have no idea." Mark exhaled, rubbing his forehead. "Get him inside before someone sees." Together, they carried the alien into the hangar, laying him down on an old metal table. Mark pulled out a flashlight and examined him, whistling low. "He's messed up bad." "What happened?" John hesitated. "His ship crashed. Then these things showed up. They had armor, weapons. They tried to kill us." Mark's expression darkened. "That's not good. If he's here, and they're hunting him, you just put a big target on your back." John already knew that. Mark grabbed a first aid kit and began cleaning the alien's wounds, though some of them oozed a strange silver liquid instead of blood. As he worked, John pulled up his sleeve, revealing the golden symbol burned into his forearm. "What the hell is this?" John asked. Mark frowned, grabbing a scanner from his workbench. He hovered it over John's arm, and the screen flickered wildly, displaying unreadable symbols. "That's definitely not normal," Mark muttered. "It's like a mix of energy and organic material. Not human tech, that's for sure." John clenched his jaw. "The old man touched me, and then this appeared." Mark sighed, setting the scanner down. "You don't just help some random alien without consequences, John. You're in this now, whether you like it or not." Before John could respond, a low groan filled the room. Both men turned as the alien elder stirred, his glowing eyes flickering open. His gaze moved between John and Mark before settling on John. He slowly sat up, wincing in pain. "You saved me," the alien rasped. John nodded. "Yeah, but I think I also got myself into a mess." The alien looked at the symbol on John's arm, his expression unreadable. Then he did something unexpected. He bowed his head. Mark raised an eyebrow. "Oh, what's happening?" The alien took a deep breath before speaking. "You have done something few in the galaxy would. You aided one of the Eldari, without expecting anything in return." John rubbed his face. "Look, man, I didn't do it for a reward. I just couldn't let you die out there." The alien nodded. "And that is why you have been marked. The sigil on your arm is not a curse. It is a bond, a life debt." John frowned. "What does that even mean?" The alien gave a weak but knowing smile. "It means you are now part of something far greater than you realize." Mark groaned. "Yeah, that sounds about right." John exhaled. "All right, just tell me one thing. Who were those guys chasing you?" The alien's expression hardened. "They are called the Zivrak. Hunters, warlords, and they will not stop until I am dead." John's stomach tightened. "So that means they're coming for us." The alien nodded. Mark crossed his arms. "Well, John, I hope you're ready for war." John wasn't, not even close, but it looked like he didn't have a choice. Because the moment he had helped this alien, he had stepped into something far bigger than himself. John sat in Mark's cluttered workshop, staring at his arm. The golden symbol still shimmered faintly under the dim lights as if alive. No matter how much he rubbed or scratched at it, the mark remained, permanent, binding. The alien elder, now sitting upright on the metal table, studied John with an expression of quiet contemplation. His deep, glowing eyes carried an ancient wisdom, as though he had seen 1,000 worlds rise and fall. Mark paced nearby, arms crossed. "All right, old man. You said this thing on John's arm is some kind of bond, a life debt. What does that actually mean?" The alien sighed, his voice gravelly but steady. "It means he is now connected to my people, whether he wishes to be or not. The sigil is a sign of honor, a binding oath." John clenched his jaw. "And what exactly am I bound to?" The elder's expression turned solemn. "To the fate of the Eldari, to our survival." A chill ran down John's spine. He had no idea what the Eldari were beyond this old man, but it didn't sound good. Mark scoffed. "Sounds like a fancy way of saying he's stuck in your war." The elder nodded slowly. "Yes." John let out a bitter laugh. "Great, just great." The alien continued, his gaze serious. "You saved me, John Mercer, and in doing so, you have inherited both my gratitude and my burden." John exhaled, rubbing his forehead. "So, what now? Those Zivrak guys are coming. Do we run? Do we fight? Because I need to know what I just signed up for." The elder's eyes darkened. "The Zivrak will come, but you cannot run forever. They are relentless. If they know you aided me, you are already a target." Mark frowned. "Yeah, I figured as much. We need to be ready." John leaned forward. "How do we stop them?" The elder hesitated, then turned to John. "The sigil on your arm is not just a mark. It is a key." John narrowed his eyes. "A key to what?" The elder held out his hand. "Come, let me show you." John hesitated for a moment, then reached out. The moment their hands touched, a surge of energy shot through him. His vision blurred. The workshop around him faded. Then, a different world. John stood in a vast, golden temple, its walls lined with ancient symbols that glowed like fireflies in the dim light. The air crackled with power. He wasn't alone. Figures in regal, flowing robes stood before him, their eyes burning like distant stars. A voice echoed through his mind. "The Guardian's bond is forged. He is the last hope." Then, in an instant, John was back in the workshop, gasping for breath. Mark rushed forward. "What the hell just happened?" John clutched his chest, his pulse racing. He turned to the elder. "What was that?" The elder nodded, as if expecting this. "A glimpse of what lies ahead." John swallowed hard. You said the sigil is a key. A key to what? The elder's gaze burned into his. To an ancient power. One the Zevrak fear. Mark muttered, that sounds like a great way to make them even angrier. The elder gave a small, sad smile. Yes, but it is also the only way to defeat them. John exhaled slowly. He had gone from an ordinary guy fixing trucks in a small town to being hunted by alien warlords, and now he was supposedly the key to some ancient power. He wasn't ready for this, but he had no choice. The elder met his gaze. You must decide, John Mercer. Will you embrace this path, or will you turn away? John looked at his arm, at the golden mark pulsing like a heartbeat. Deep down, he already knew the answer. John barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, flashes of the golden temple filled his mind. The voices, the symbols, the weight of the responsibility now forced upon him. It was overwhelming. He had never asked for any of this. By morning, his decision was made. When Mark walked into the workshop, still groggy from sleep, John was already up, staring at his reflection in a cracked mirror. The golden mark on his arm seemed even brighter in the early morning light. Mark sighed, grabbing a cup of coffee. So, you ready to run? John shook his head. No, I'm ready to fight. Mark choked on his coffee. What? John turned to face him, determination in his eyes. If those Zivrak guys are coming, I'm not just going to sit here and wait for them to kill me. Or you. Or the old man. I need to know what I'm up against. I need to know what this power is. Mark rubbed his face. Jesus, man. You sure about this? You're not exactly a space warrior. John smirked. Guess I'll have to become one. At that moment, the alien elder stepped into the room. His expression was unreadable, but his glowing eyes carried something close to approval. You have chosen the path of the Guardian, the elder said. Then we must begin your training. John raised an eyebrow. Training, like space kung fu. The elder tilted his head. In a way. But first, we must leave this place. The Zivrak will find us soon. Mark groaned. Oh, great. And here I was hoping to have a quiet morning. The elder ignored him and held out his hand to John. Come. John hesitated but then grasped the elder's hand. Instantly, the world around him shifted. The workshop vanished. In its place, John found himself standing in a vast, open landscape under a deep purple sky. Massive floating stones hovered in the air, spinning slowly, defying gravity. Strange creatures with translucent wings drifted by like living jellyfish. The air smelled crisp, like rain after a storm. John turned in awe. Where are we? The elder stood beside him, his robes flowing in the unseen wind. This is the astral realm, a place where time and space fold upon themselves. Here, your mind will be trained before your body follows. John frowned. So, this is like an alien dream world. Something like that. John looked around, amazed but skeptical. And what exactly am I supposed to learn here? The elder pointed to his arm. The sigil on your skin is more than a mark. It is a conduit, a link to the energy of the Eldari. If you wish to fight the Zivrak, you must learn to control it. John exhaled. All right, let's do this. The elder extended his hand, and suddenly, the ground beneath John trembled. A deep hum filled the air, vibrating in his bones. The golden mark on his arm flared to life, burning hot, but not painfully. Then, a shape emerged from the air itself. It looked like a blade, golden, shimmering, and floating just before him. It wasn't solid, yet it pulsed with energy. John reached out hesitantly. As his fingers closed around it, a rush of power flooded his veins. His mind exploded with visions, ancient warriors standing against monstrous creatures, their golden weapons cutting through darkness. He saw planets burning, battles raging, and at the center of it all, the Zivrak, their glowing red eyes filled with rage and hunger. Then he saw himself, standing against them, fighting, winning. The visions faded. John gasped, dropping to his knees. His hands shook. He looked at the elder wide-eyed. What was that? The elder smiled faintly, a glimpse of what is to come. John's breathing was heavy, his mind reeling. He wasn't just some guy anymore. He was becoming something more. Something dangerous. Something powerful. And the Zavrak were about to find out exactly what that meant. John's pulse still pounded in his ears as he struggled to process what had just happened. The energy blade had vanished the moment he lost focus, but the sensation remained. A raw power thrumming in his veins, waiting to be harnessed. The elder watched him closely. You are beginning to awaken, but you lack control. Without mastery, the power will consume you before it serves you. John wiped the sweat from his forehead. So, what do I do? Meditation, magic spells, or is it more like jitty training? The elder didn't smile. You must learn to command the energy, not simply wield it. It is not a weapon. It is an extension of your will. Mark, who had been leaning against a floating rock, crossed his arms. All right, so you're saying he needs to think real hard, and boom, he's a warrior. The elder shook his head. No, he must face the trials. John's stomach dropped. That sounds ominous. The elder gestured toward the horizon. Come. Before John could argue, the world shifted again. The floating islands blurred, and suddenly, he was standing at the edge of a massive abyss. The ground was cracked and scorched, and above him, the sky darkened with swirling storm clouds. The only way forward was a single, narrow bridge made of glowing symbols. John swallowed. Yeah, this doesn't look safe. The elder stood beside him. This is the trial of resolve. It will test the strength of your mind. If you hesitate, if you let doubt cloud your purpose, the path will vanish beneath your feet. Mark whistled. Great, a floating death trap. John clenched his fists. And what happens if I fall? The elder's glowing eyes darkened. You will be lost in the void forever. John exhaled sharply. Cool, no pressure. He took a hesitant step forward. The symbols beneath his feet flared with golden light, solid beneath him. Another step, then another. The bridge held. But then, whispers, soft at first, like distant echoes, but soon they grew louder, twisting into words that cut through his thoughts. You're not strong enough. You don't belong here. You're going to fail. John froze. The bridge flickered beneath him. The abyss below seemed to stretch, endless and terrifying. A cold sweat broke out on his neck. They will die because of you. You will never be enough. John's breath came faster. His body tensed. The bridge flickered again, symbols dimming. His foot began to slip. He was losing. John. Mark's voice snapped through the air. Focus. Whatever's in your head, fight it. John squeezed his eyes shut. The whispers weren't real. They were his own doubts, his own fears, and fear had no power unless he let it. His eyes snapped open. He clenched his fists. No. The whispers shattered. The bridge solidified. The glowing symbols pulsed, brighter than ever. John stepped forward, his stride steady, his mind clear. The moment he reached the other side, the abyss vanished. The sky brightened. The ground beneath him solidified into golden stone. The elder smiled. You have passed the first trial. John let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His heart still hammered, but deep inside, he felt stronger. Mark smirked. Not bad. Space warrior. John rolled his eyes. Yeah. What's next? The elder's expression turned serious. The next trial will test something far more difficult. John frowned. Which is? The elder's voice was low, heavy. Your heart. The golden stone beneath John's feet pulsed with a faint warmth, like a heartbeat. The moment of victory from the first trial still lingered, but the elder's words sent a shiver down his spine. "Your heart." John exhaled, trying to steady himself. The first trial had nearly broken him, but he pushed through. He wasn't about to stop now. Mark clapped him on the back. "So, what's this one? Gonna make him fight a shadow version of himself. Maybe some kind of space monster." The elder remained silent for a moment, his glowing eyes unreadable. Then he simply said, "Follow." The world shifted again. John felt himself pulled forward, not physically, but like something had grabbed his mind and yanked it through space. When he blinked, he was standing in a village. Not an alien one, a human village. Small wooden houses lined a dusty path. The smell of burning firewood filled the air. Children laughed as they ran past, playing some sort of game with wooden sticks. A market bustled with life, people exchanging goods, smiling, talking. John turned to Mark, who had appeared beside him. "What the hell is this?" Mark shrugged. "Beats me, man. Looks like some medieval town." Then John saw her. A woman stood near a well, her back turned to him. Long, dark hair cascaded over her shoulders, and when she turned, John's breath caught in his throat. She was beautiful, but not just in a physical way. Something about her felt familiar, though he was certain he had never seen her before. Her dark eyes held kindness, wisdom, and sadness. And yet, as soon as she spotted John, her face lit up with joy. "You're back," she exclaimed, running toward him. John stepped backward instinctively. "Wait, what?" Before he could react, she wrapped her arms around him, holding him tight. He felt her warmth, her heartbeat against his chest. It wasn't an illusion. It felt real. "Where have you been?" she asked, looking up at him. I thought you weren't coming back." John's mouth went dry. I don't know who you are." The woman's smile faltered. "John, what are you saying?" "It's me, Elira." The name sent a shock through his system. His vision blurred for a second, and suddenly flashes of memories filled his mind. Him and Elira walking through this very village, hand in hand. Sitting under the stars, whispering secrets to each other. A promise, a vow to always return to her. John clutched his head. No, this isn't real." Elira's face twisted in pain. "What are you saying? We've built a life here, John. You and me. Our home. Our family." John's heart pounded. He turned to Mark. "You're seeing this, right? Tell me I'm not crazy." But Mark was gone. The village, the people, it was just him and Elira now. The elder's voice echoed in the air. "This is the trial of heart, the hardest of them all. To be a guardian, you must be willing to sacrifice what you love." John shook his head. No, I don't even know her. This isn't my life." But even as he said the words, doubt crept in. What if this was real? What if the memories weren't illusions, but something he had somehow forgotten? Elira cupped his face gently. "You don't have to leave again," she whispered. "Stay. We can be happy. You don't need to fight anymore." Her touch was warm, familiar. His heart ached. Then he noticed something. The golden mark on his arm, the symbol of the Eldari, was fading. His connection to the power, the mission, the fight against the Zavrak, all of it was slipping away. If he stayed, he wouldn't have to fight. He wouldn't have to risk his life. He could have peace. John's breath hitched. But then he saw something in Elira's eyes. Fear, not of losing him. Fear that he might wake up. John's stomach dropped. This wasn't real. Elira's grip on him tightened. "Stay with me," she pleaded, her voice trembling. John took a deep breath. "I can't." Elira's face twisted in pain, then anger. Her form flickered, twisting into something inhuman for just a second before vanishing into dust. The village collapsed. The sky darkened. And suddenly, John was back. Back in the astral realm. Back standing before the elder. His knees buckled, and he gasped for air. Mark stood nearby, looking worried. "Dude, you okay?" John swallowed, his chest rising and falling rapidly. He looked at the elder, realization dawning. That was never real, was it? The elder nodded solemnly. The trial does not create illusions. It reveals desires. You were tested not by what you fear, but by what you want most. John clenched his fists. His heart still ached, even though he knew none of it had been real. Mark crossed his arms. So, what would have happened if he stayed? The elder's expression darkened. He would have been lost. Forever. John shivered. He had passed. But it had nearly broken him. John barely had time to process what had just happened. The trial had shaken him to his core, but there was no time to rest. The elder's glowing eyes studied him carefully, as if weighing the depth of his resolve. "You have passed the trial of heart," the elder said, his voice a quiet rumble. "Now, only one task remains." John steadied himself. His body still felt like it was recovering from the emotional battle he had just endured. The false reality, Elira's face, her touch, it had felt so real. A part of him still ached, but he pushed it aside. He wasn't here for illusions. He was here for the truth. Mark let out a breath beside him. "So, what's the final test? We gotta fight a space god or something." The elder's gaze remained unreadable. "Not a god," he said, "but something close." The world around them shifted. The golden stone beneath their feet cracked, light spilling through the fractures like molten fire. A deep hum filled the air, growing louder and louder. John braced himself, but nothing could have prepared him for what came next. The ground collapsed. John felt his stomach lurch as he and Mark plunged into the abyss. Wind roared in his ears, his body tumbling through empty darkness. He reached out blindly. His fingers brushed against Mark's sleeve. But then, everything stopped. Not just his fall, everything. John was frozen in place. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It was as if time itself had stopped. He wasn't falling anymore, but he wasn't standing either. He just existed. A presence stirred in the void. Something massive. John couldn't see it, but he felt it. A consciousness so old and vast that his own thoughts felt like tiny sparks in comparison. Then a voice, deeper than the universe itself, spoke. "You are not ready." John's heart slammed against his ribs. His body refused to move, but his mind screamed at him to do something. The presence pushed against his very soul, testing, weighing, searching. He tried to speak, but his lips wouldn't move. He tried to think, but his thoughts were drowned in the sheer gravity of the being before him. Then, light erupted. The void shattered. John landed hard, knees hitting the ground. Air rushed back into his lungs, and he gasped, coughing. His vision blurred, but as it cleared, he realized he was somewhere new, somewhere ancient. Towering monoliths of obsidian stone stretched into an endless, starless sky. Golden symbols glowed faintly on the surfaces, pulsing with an energy John could barely comprehend. Mark groaned beside him, rubbing his head. "I take it back. Fighting a space god might have been easier." John slowly pushed himself to his feet. His entire body buzzed with energy. It wasn't pain. It was power. The power of the trials. The power of the Eldari. "You are still standing," the elder's voice echoed, though the elder himself was nowhere to be seen. "That is unexpected." John turned, heart still pounding. What was that?" "The first one," the elder answered, his form materializing from the shadows. "The oldest of our kind, the keeper of knowledge, the judge of all who seek the power of the Eldari." Mark exhaled sharply, and it said John wasn't ready. The elder's gaze sharpened. "It always says that. It is a final test, not one of battle, but of will. Many have crumbled beneath its presence, lost their minds, surrendered their souls to the void. You resisted. John swallowed hard. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on him. He had faced something beyond comprehension. And yet, he was still here. He clenched his fists. So, did I pass? The elder stepped forward. You have done more than pass. You have awakened something that has long been dormant within your kind. John frowned. What does that mean? The elder extended a hand, and before John could react, a burst of energy surrounded him. He felt his body lifted into the air, golden light wrapping around his arms, his chest, his mind. A symbol burned itself into his right hand, an intricate, glowing crest unlike anything he had seen before. He felt it. Power. Ancient, limitless power, coursing through his veins. And then, deep within his mind, a voice whispered, "It is done." John crashed to the ground, breathless. His fingers trembled as he looked at the mark now etched into his skin. Mark stepped back, eyes wide. Dude, I think you just got an upgrade." John's pulse pounded. He didn't know what had just happened, but one thing was certain. Everything had changed.